and welcome to Q Primary Presents Intentional Tech. I am your host, Kayla Harlow, and today we are going to be talking on reading assessments and how to approach them in the digital age. As we know, technology can often be overwhelming in a primary classroom, so we want to make sure that we are using the most effective and efficient resources when it comes to tech integration. This is where Literably comes in. Today, I am speaking with the co-founder of Literably, Tyler Borek, and he is going to talk about how this resource has been developed, what their future goals are, and how you can gain access to it today.
Hi, Tyler. Welcome to Intentional Tech. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We are so excited to learn more about the awesome things that Literably is doing. Go ahead and give us a little bit of introduction about your background and how you ended up starting Literably.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kayla. I'm super excited to be here. Before Literably, I was working at a school in Boston, a public middle school. And I actually wasn't a very techie person at that point. I sort of got into education and just was working in the school. But what really I noticed working there is that I felt like all my colleagues, all the other adults in the school were super talented, very committed, hardworking people, really wanted what was best for the kids. But I felt like we didn't all have strong systems supporting us. And so we were all working super hard, very manually. A lot of people were sort of burning themselves out. And I felt like the kids weren't doing as well as they could. And so that kind of sparked my interest in ed tech as a way to try to build stronger systems to support educators and students. So anyway, that was the kernel of my interest in ed tech. And then how I ended up working specifically on Literably is that actually a friend of mine, I was visiting him in DC, and it turns out that he was really excited about starting something. And so the two of us started sort of exploring ed tech ideas together. And we eventually read this research paper by Marilyn Yager-Adams, who was a professor at Brown at the time. And she was basically calling for people to use speech recognition to help out with reading practice and assessment. And so we thought that was super interesting. So we immediately went and tried out various sort of speech rec models to see how that would work. And what we found is that the speech rec wasn't really as good as advertised.
Right.
And so it seemed like a possible dead end. But then we got thinking about what she said about assessment, and we thought, well, assessment doesn't need to be instantaneous. And so instead of using speech rec, sort of while the tech is improving, you could theoretically record a student and then have a person on our side actually listen to the student, transcribe what they said and send it back. And so we started sort of floating this idea by teachers and got a really enthusiastic response. And so we threw up a landing page and started working on it.
That is awesome. Yeah, I completely agree with the idea of streamlining and systemizing our teaching practices. As we know, educators' plates are more than full, and the data is so important in the foundations of literacy, let alone the tracking throughout the years, that if we can streamline and make it accessible for our teachers, more power to you. Awesome. So how does Literably address those challenges aside from the time commitment? What benefit is there for teachers?
Yeah, sure. So we basically, we've had like thousands of conversations with educators about this at this point, but it's fairly commonsensical. We basically hear that educators want three things from their reading assessment systems. They want something that's fast, that's accurate, and that's actionable. So basically they want to like quickly find the kids who need help and what they need help with and what to do next to move them forward. And right now, educators basically have two options. So they have like teacher scored assessments, so they can do one-on-one with students. And then they have computer scored assessments, which are typically primarily multiple choice. And the really tricky thing about sort of assessment in a space is that most of the really critical reading skills, where most kids get tripped up, like phonological awareness, phonics, and fluency, are all really oral. And so they're best assessed out loud. And computers aren't very good at actually hearing what kids are saying. And so most schools basically require teachers to assess these skills one-on-one with students, sort of paper pencil. But that process, of course, is not very fast and sort of compounds the problems that teachers have around limited instructional time. And so essentially right now, this is a choice between computerized assessments, which are very fast, but aren't as accurate and actionable for these critical skills, and then teacher scored assessments, which can be accurate and actionable if you have the training and enough time to invest, but are very slow.
Right. So talking about the computerized assessments versus the in-person time-consuming assessments, how does Literably offer the ability, the time-saving ability, while also offering reliable and accurate data?
Yeah, great question. So I think the really critical piece here is that a lot of these assessments are oral, and so you really need to hear the student to be able to score them, appropriately. And the sort of obvious approach, if you want a computer to hear a student read, is you use speech rec or automatic speech recognition. And we've done a lot of work with speech rec. But the truth is, with speech recognition right now, that when the audio is really clear, it can be very good. But when the audio is less clear, it really struggles. Our VP engineering actually made this analogy to like automatic soap dispensers at the airport, where under ideal conditions, if it's like a well-maintained soap dispenser and everything, it can work well. But then when things aren't quite right, you can sort of be waving your hand there and it's not picking up what's going on. And the same thing is kind of true of speech recognition. And this is particularly a problem in like elementary classroom environments where there's lots of background noise. You've got kids who are maybe not interacting with the computer in a way that an adult might, and speaking differently than an adult might, and so that poses some challenges.
Yeah, and their articulation too, or if they're an English language learner, like there's a lot of variables there, understandably.
Totally. Yeah, it's not a cut and dry like professional microphone adult speaking situation. And so anyway, there's a lot of challenges there for just a purely automated process. And so what we ended up doing is we actually built a system where we analyze every recording that we receive using speech recognition. But then for the parts where the speech recognition is not as confident about what the student's saying, so if there's any sort of uncertainty about what the student actually said, we'll have a trained, normed human grader basically listen to the student read and transcribe exactly what they said. And one thing that's kind of interesting about this approach is that it's not actually that innovative an approach, in that it's innovative in education, but in industries other than education, where really accurate transcription is really important, this is kind of the gold standard. Is that like if you want accurate transcription,
you proofread it essentially.
A hybrid process, exactly.
Awesome. And what I really like is the data that is received through that hybrid grading approach is transcribed by the sounds that the student said, so that you can go back and you can figure out what specifically, is it onset, is it rhyme, what they are struggling with, which is really valuable data in formative assessment, and going back and having that documentation more so than when you're in-person assessing. So we talked about in-person graders. Can you talk a little bit about what they are trained on or what qualifications they have?
Yeah, sure. So the way we approach this is that, really what we want is we want all Literably graders to be able to listen to a piece of audio and transcribe it very consistently and accurately, so that every grader is basically doing it the same way. And so we've kind of structured our whole process around that. And so the way it's set up is that actually anyone can apply to be a Literably grader. So you can sign up for an account and you can submit your application. But the application itself is to score assessments that we've already scored. And so we look at how you scored it, we look at how we scored it, and we can basically just pick the people who demonstrate in the application that they can score really accurately. Okay. And then if they demonstrate that accuracy, then we'll let them grade some real recordings. But we'll randomly mix in sort of what we call evaluation recordings that we've already scored. And so the grader never knows if it's a real recording or an evaluation recording. And so we can basically keep tabs on all of our graders over time and make sure that we're providing a really highly accurate, consistent result to the customers.
Awesome. I like that system. I'm so diving in a little bit more from an educator perspective. Are those graders, or the way that you guys grade, is that based on a research-based assessment that's out there? Like, I know for our district, we did a Cadence, formerly Dibbles. Is there a certain assessment you aim towards to kind of make it consistent, or at least the most transferable for different districts and schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we try to do is we try not to be super, we try not to reinvent the wheel, I'd say, on the content of the assessments that we're giving. And so basically the content of the assessment should all be very familiar to teachers and be similar to what they're doing by hand right now. So for oral reading fluency, for example, the student's going to read the text aloud, and then we'll basically, we'll report the student's accuracy, their oral reading rate, but we'll also mark up that text to show you exactly what they said. And so, if the word was cat, but they said bat instead, we would basically, cross out the cat and then transcribe bat above it. And so you would see exactly what the student uttered in their reading. And similarly for phonological awareness and phonics, like we're basically just giving the students prompts, the students are responding, and then we're transcribing for you what they said in response.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we were going to go into speech recognition, but we already kind of talked on that. So we're going to transition into Literably's take on the science of reading. I know this is a very trendy topic right now. Really, outside of the science of reading, it is structured literacy and more of a focus on phonological and phonemic awareness rather than balanced literacy in the past. So some states have adopted initiatives and framework to support the science of reading. Some have not, but a lot are moving in that direction. So what is Literably's take on science of reading?
Yeah, so we're really excited about the science of reading as a movement, because we think it's basically giving people this sort of shared vocabulary, understanding that makes it easier to communicate, and it's just sort of elevating some important research findings that I think are going to be helpful in terms of structuring instruction. One thing that like we've really taken out of it is that basically there's these sort of core pieces of instruction that you want to make sure you're covering in your elementary classrooms. The sort of most obvious would be phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocab, and comprehension. And what we heard from a lot of our customers actually is that they felt like for phonological awareness and phonics, they weren't really getting the sort of information they needed to know what students needed. So you can do some really, quick screeners that you do hand scored with students, and it'll tell you, maybe a student has a phonics issue or they have a phonological awareness issue, but it wasn't getting a lot more granular than that. And so that's one of the things that we sort of have challenged ourselves to try to deliver for schools is a foundational skills, phonological awareness, phonics assessment that can get you a lot deeper into what each individual student needs.
Awesome.
And yeah, I can add more about that, but I'll pause.
Well, no, I mean, it's kind of going to transition into what does Literably offer in regards to after that assessment? Does it make suggestions for the next steps or looking at the child's progress? Does it help with those actionable steps once you have the data?
Great question. So right now, Literably is very assessment focused. So we administer the assessment, we score it for you, we'll show you how the students did, we'll show you their progress over time, and we'll give you some sort of dashboard of views so you can see like what aspects they maybe are struggling with or need to work on. But so far, we haven't taken that next step of saying, here's what we recommend instructionally, or here's how you might want to interpret this data and move forward in your classroom. But we recently actually won a sort of competition or a grant from a collection of foundations called the Learning Engineering Tools Competition. And basically the proposal that we put out for that competition was to not only expand our assessment to cover sort of all the areas that you might want to assess in literacy and make it really comprehensive, but also to take that next step of sort of what should you do instructionally based on this data. And the approach we're taking to that, we're really excited about, is that we basically want to set up a system where we give researchers the ability to sort of test different interventions for the same challenge. So if you have a population of students that are struggling with a specific aspect of phonological awareness, let's say, and then you could have researchers basically anonymously sort of identify this group of students. And then for half of the group, they could say, well, I want to see how this works for them. If they have the good to say, I want to see this other approach works. And you can measure which approach is more effective, and then basically improve the system over time so that we can make sure we're always giving you the best possible recommendation based on what your individual students are struggling with or need help with.
The geek in me is really jazzed about that. I love the direction that you guys are going, and what an amazing product. I wish I had it when I was still in the classroom, because it would make my life so much easier. And having that consistent ability to assess those kids and track their progress is so valuable. And teachers are so overwhelmed right now with everything they have on their plate. Technology can be one of those things that's really overwhelming. So to see such a valuable resource out there for teachers, I don't think nearly enough people know about Literably. So that is our goal, to give them a chance to try it out. So can you talk a little bit about how they would gain access to such an awesome tool?
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate that. So yeah, basically you can just go to literably.com. So literably.com. And you can sign up for an account right away. So if you're a teacher, you can just create a teacher account. It will give you right off the bat just 10 assessments sort of for free each calendar month that you can try out with your students and see how it works for you and make sure it's something that you think could be valuable in your classroom. And then you also actually have the option to do a whole class trial. So if you wanted to try it out with your whole class of students, you can basically just click a button in the interface there, and we'll set you up with a whole class trial for a couple weeks, so you can sort of get a feel for it with your whole group of students. And then ultimately, if it's something that you like and are into, we of course love to partner with schools and with districts, even subsets of schools, and we'd love to work with anyone who's interested.
That's just awesome. So I encourage everyone to check out the show notes. It will include tutorials and snapshots of what Literably looks like from the student and teacher perspective, as well as direct links to sign up for your trial. And thank you, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having us on.
Thank you again, Tyler, for joining us on Intentional Tech. I am so excited to see what Literably has done and where they will go in the future. So if you are as interested as I am, go ahead over to literably.com and you can sign up for your free trial today, as well as any of the show notes or resources that have been mentioned will be available at littledigitallearners.com/podcast. Also, and as a special back to school gift for you, go ahead over to littleditallearners.com/wordwall to receive your free digital word wall to use with your students this back to school season. Also, be sure to head over to q.org to join the new Q-munity, where you can connect with like-minded educators and receive free professional development resources.
Thank you for tuning in to today's show. Resources can be found at littleditallearners.com/podcast, and be sure to subscribe, like, or follow. And always remember, technology is a tool and not a toy.